Welcome back, and we're now going to talk a little bit about this idea of, so how do you create attitude change? Certainly, we would argue that education is huge. It's why this MOOC has been developed. It's why I've spent a lot of time and used a lot of resources from other people to assist with this, because we want to educate. We want to increase awareness. I'd like to now take us to two of our guest speakers, Mark and Aaron, who will both talk about, from their standpoint, what they have done, how they have tried to talk about their unique disabilities in an effort to educate people in a more broad sense about not only their own disabilities, but disabilities generally.
I love sharing my story with the students in the classroom setting. I get up on that stage and I always have that panic that, oh my God, I got to get off this stage and I got to go off here right now. But it's the reactions I get from the students. It's knowing that there are exits on both sides of me. It's knowing that if I get stuck, I can say, okay, somebody asked me a question. I know if I get stuck, Dr. Long will ask me a question and kind of help guide me a little bit. And it's a lot of the reactions I get back from the students. It's the responses I'll get, I have the same thing. I never knew medication could make such a difference, and now I'm taking medication, and now I'm starting to feel better. It's the student I had come up to me and tell me about an application she has on her phone to help organize her. I use dry erase boards and colored markers and just kind of keep track of different schedules, who's going where, when, what project I have to do when, and that's the way that works for me. But it was really cool that she came up to me and said, hey, this is what works for me. Maybe it might work for you because it's a handheld electronic version, and you can have audible alarms go off. So it's things like that. It's the sharing that, I think it helps some of the students feel that they're not alone, that especially in this age bracket when you're talking between 18 and 22, 25, that depression and anxiety is not that uncommon. It touches 1 in 4 adults at some point in their lives. So I think it just helps them to know that they're not alone, that there are ways to get through it, and to see somebody who has hit rock bottom and climb back out, to know that it's possible to do. The more I share and the more comfortable I am with myself, the better I am able to help others. And I think it just kind of really projects out that way with, no matter what I'm doing now, I feel like I'm always kind of, I've noticed things like handles that aren't accessible or just little things that I pick up on. And, my kids, I teach my kids, tolerance is one of the biggest things I teach my kids.
I think the fear is the lack of knowledge, that people don't have the knowledge. And it's kind of that thing, it's kind of old school that, well, this is what I heard, and so this is what I believe, and I'm entitled to my own facts, right? Unfortunately, that's not true, but unfortunately, that's the way people act. And, in my own experience, for instance, with my family does not like me to tell people about HIV, or specifically my HIV. So we don't get to talk about it. I don't talk about it with their friends. And what's unfortunate about that is they don't get the education. They don't get to see that people can live normally with HIV. And that's a detriment, I think. Also, it doesn't afford me the opportunity of getting the support that these friends and family may offer. And that also is a detriment.
People that are a little awkward when it comes to when they make statements such as, well, let's run. Oh, wait a minute, you can't run. I'm sorry. I do get that to this day. I don't get offended. This has happened a long time ago. I view it as an educational experience for somebody else to actually have exposure to somebody with a disability. And I think more people that have disabilities really need to be aware of it, because it's not only them, I don't think we have necessarily a duty, but it's really nice to help somebody see a different view of somebody with a disability,
I use a lot of comedy when I talk to people about my disability, because if I mention the word blind, people seem to freeze and then fall apart because they don't know how to talk about it. So talking about blindness and using a bit of humor is my way of breaking the ice. just because it makes people warm up, I guess, to dealing with it. Even though I've accepted my disability, many people haven't. So in order for them to warm up to it, I have to make it easier to swallow, if you know what I mean.
That. And they'll ask you questions, well, who do you live with? You know, and sometimes it depends upon my mood, but I always have to think, you know, you're teaching. This is a teaching. This is part of you that you'll forever have to be a teacher. The majority of life will be a teachable moment. The majority of your life will, whether we like it or not, it's going to be a teachable moment. It could be a teachable moment or frustration, and frustration will wear you down and give you other illnesses more so than a teachable moment.
But there's some other things you can do, and I'm going to have you work through a couple of exercises with me, or at least one to start off with. And it's referred to as the mine, thine exercise. So if you would, either on your computer or just take out a piece of paper, and as I've got illustrated up here, I want you to write down a column and write down the initials of 5 of your friends, okay? Any 5 that you want, doesn't matter. Now, once you've got them written down, next to them I want you to put down, what do you see as their worst problem, if you will? And it could be a disability, it could be a personal attribute, a personality trait, whatever it might be, but what do you see as the worst thing they have to deal with? Okay, so you'll notice here I've got a friend who's an alcoholic, I've got another one who's depressed, I've got another one who's obese, so you see what I'm talking about here, yes? Then, and again, you can do this privately, so don't feel like you need to send it in or share it otherwise, but in this third column, I want you to put down what your worst disability is, what your worst limitation is, all right? So if I use myself, one of the things that I struggle with a lot is anxiety. So I tend to be a fairly anxious person. So if I were to think, what about me creates the biggest challenge or the most lack of sleep, if you will, it's anxiety. So you've got this table constructed now. Now what I want you to do next is look at the comparisons. So this first comparison I had with RS, who's an alcoholic, versus the anxiety, circle for each of those comparisons which one of those you would take. So if you had a choice, if you choose to be anxious or alcoholic, which would you take? If you could choose to be depressed versus anxious, which would you take? So do that with your paper. Take just a moment to do that. What I'd like you to do now is count it up. Right? This is a exercise that's been done thousands of times, and what happens in almost all cases is people claim more of their own disabilities, worst features, if you will, than they would about others. It ties into that insider-outsider perspective. I may have anxiety, but I know kind of how to use it. I know how it's part of my life. I know how it works. But I don't know anything about being a procrastinator, or I don't know anything about really being an alcoholic. And so those things, would I trade it off? No, I would keep what I know. We all tend to do that. That's why, again, that concept of insider versus outsider is so very important. Kind of interesting perspective to look at, isn't it? To see, most of us claim our own disabilities. That's how we are. We are insiders to ourselves. Now, when we think about this idea, not only taking exercises like that, but other ways of creating change, want to think about it as existing on all sorts of different levels. It's certainly the one-to-one level. It's why one of the reasons we include the disability etiquette questions. If you can make change on a one-to-one basis, that's a great start. But we're also looking at change on a systemic level, whether it's school, whether it's workplace, whether it's broader society. But how can we create change? Because there's multiple ways in which that can happen. I would say that for purposes of the MOOC, I'm going to mention two strategies, and one we'll actually save to later, because one, school-based changes, we'll talk about how to create an inclusive, friendly, helpful school environment in the lesson on education. But as we think about creating change, one of the things that I would like to certainly caution listeners about is the idea of disability simulations. Okay, and again, I recognize that when we talk about simulations, they're a very common element in a lot of disability awareness days. However, when you think about the concept behind it, you look at the research, and you also look at what people with disabilities themselves have written about it, we should have some caution about the use of simulations. When we think about it as it relates to all sorts of other groups, we assume that, oh, come on, how could I possibly, become a woman for a day and know what that's like, all right? On the other hand, there's some assumption that by putting a blindfold on or covering your ears or whatever, that you can truly get that experience of what it's like to have a disability. And you've got a couple of readings associated with today's lesson that will argue that that's really not the case. That what happens is when I put the earplugs in, I don't know how to sign, I don't know how to communicate, I don't have the lip reading, speech reading skills. In the same way, you put a blindfold on me, I don't know anything about orientation and mobility. So all these fears become quite real, and I also know that, oh, this is temporary. What we do know is that simulations have very mixed responses, and in a lot of cases, they tend to reinforce the negative stereotypes and don't do anything to necessarily change attitudes to being a more positive kind of perspective. So in summary, as we look at the overall lesson for today, we've hit a number of different topics that I think hopefully have caused you to think. And certainly one of the most important parts, and you've heard from our guest speakers, and I'll reiterate it here, is that consider that disability is only one aspect of the person. It's no different than your gender, your hair color, your size. It's an aspect of who you are, but it doesn't define you. We also talked about the variety of myths that society holds, that we really do have kind of that us versus them, and when we look at them, we assume that, gosh, how could you possibly be healthy? How could you possibly have a good life if in fact you have a disability? That there's a disconnect, that if you're non-disabled, we have a hard time understanding that. We also, and in a way to kind of maybe cut ourselves some slack and be okay with things, is we identify the idea that we're hardwired to notice differences. That when things aren't exactly as we expect them to be, we notice. Now, the point we made on that is noticing is, you can't help it. It's human nature. But how you respond to that, we talked about it as primitive versus rational brain. How your rational brain thinks about that, processes it, and how you subsequently react, that's the key. Then we had a final segment talking about strategies for attitude change. And again, as a reminder, the idea of disability simulations are oftentimes ones that don't receive a lot of support, and there are a variety of other things that you can do instead. We've got a number of them listed for you, things like interviewing, patronizing businesses that support people with disabilities, learning, talking with others, lots of things you can do to get more information, to broaden your awareness, but that don't artificially simulate what it would be like to have a disability. So with that, we'll close up, and as we look toward next week, we're going to be talking about adaptation to disability.